There are a lot of injuries in the sport of running, and that really shouldn't be a surprise to anybody listening to this intro. A lot of people get injured yearly, and that's just not really what we're looking for if we want to have this long career. And a good physical therapist or physio, if you're abroad, can be an integral part to your injury prevention and or recovery strategy, depending where you are in your running journey. When I met Nat Collins at the UESCA Ultrarunning conference at the end of September, I knew I wanted to have him on the podcast as a highly qualified physical therapist who has helped so many people recover from injury, and just someone with whom I saw eye to eye on a lot of the injury stuff in this world. Sorry it's a little late. We recorded this a little over a month ago, and then I get hit with the depression wall, but we're pulling out of the spin, and I'm really glad to have Nat on. So let's get to the interview. Welcome to the Trail and Ultrarunning Training Podcast. My name is Will Franz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. All right, welcome back to the podcast, or welcome to Trail and Ultra Running Training. This week I have Nat Collins. He is a physical therapist, and he and I met at the fairly recent UESCA Ultra Running conference. I wanted to have him to come on, talk about injuries and rehab and all sorts of stuff. So Nat, how about you tell us about yourself and how you got into this whole thing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Will. I'm a physical therapist in Colorado Springs. I specialize in treating athletes, mostly runners, ultra runners, sub-marathoners, some road marathoners. I did my undergrad work at Kansas, and then I did an internship with Adam State's cross-country team, and then ended up staying in the state of Colorado. I went to Colorado State and did a master's in applied physiology and studied mitochondrial dysfunction and cardiovascular dysfunction there. And found out I didn't want to cut up mouse hearts for the rest of my life. And went to PT school at Northwestern and came back out to Colorado, started working with some athletes out here, Jason Koop among them, and then some of his athletes from CTS, and started seeing a lot of trail and ultra runners. And over the years have kind of carved out a little niche in treating those folks. So it's been cool to work with some of those athletes over the years and figure out the things that they run into at different cycles during their training and how to help them out.
That's awesome, man. So I guess just jumping into some of that, what are some of the injuries or things that people encounter at different cycles of their training? What do you tend to see?
Yeah, I'd say there's the stuff that I see is kind of a cross section of what's most common, and that's plantar foot pain. So whether that's plantar fasciopathy or that's posterior tibial tendon dysfunction or tendon strain there, knee pain, so compressive knee pain that people get from running a lot of miles either too quickly or coming back post-pregnancy or coming back too quickly after a race. And then a lot of hip flexor issues or labral issues, so hip cartilage pain. And then with ultra runners, I actually see a lot of back issues. So whether that's SI pain, low back pain, or mid back pain. A lot of people start running with a pack, trying to train for a race, and they're not used to loading it that much. I think this changed a little bit now. I think Coop Media actually just had somebody on the other day, and they were talking about training with a little bit heavier pack, not even just for the contents of that pack, but training with something so you've got some load there for performance standpoint for working on stiffness. So, but that's one of the things, and I actually experienced that myself. I think trying to train for a 50 miler a little bit too quickly, I developed a sports hernia, which is a strain of the connective tissue between your ab muscles and one of your long groin muscles. And that was debilitating.
Dude, that's terrible.
Oh my God. It took the better part of 3 or 4 months to come back from that. So, that's, I think, one of the kind of the unique ones that trail runners see that road runners don't. type of like oblique injuries, ab injuries.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess I'm not too surprised by that with you carrying extra weight. Yeah, I saw Coop had one about like weight vested running, and I haven't listened to it yet. It was about a week ago, but I I don't know. I can't say I'm all that surprised being a personal trainer and seeing how people load their low back. If it like any extra weight, I could see it causing problems.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do for people who are, I mean, let's pick a couple of those apart. So, like, what do you do
Yeah.
for people who are experiencing low back pain? Like, let's start with the trail people. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you tolerate it?
Mhm. Yeah. So I think that that just kind of depends on the cause. I think the thing that I may see most frequently is people that are just starting to get like it's an overloading injury more than it is a control based thing. And they've been running a couple hours a week, until the last few months. And now they're running 8, 10, 12 hours a week. And they're just not used to it. And so if they're overloading their spine on a relative scale, we've got to do some things to kind of offload that. And
Makes
those
sense.
include just really basic exercises like working on some trunk rotation things and pelvic tilts and kind of like not sit-ups, because that's a
Mm-hmm.
compressive thing that may hurt the spine, but just like little crunches and planks. And a lot of it is actually re-education on how they're spending their time throughout the day, so there's not that compressive load on their back. So if they can change the way that they're sitting or the way they're standing at work, how they're lifting things, how they're holding their kids at home, or how they're sleeping, that gets a bigger percentage of the day, that we can take some force off of their back and start sending some more signals that things are a little bit more comfortable there, and we're not really loading this pain arc, or sending signals to this pain arc through their spinal cord into their brain, that there's always something there that's going to cause discomfort. There's more things in their day where they feel better. So
Makes sense.
it's not rocket science. I mean, it's just really basic stuff, but people kind of have to know what's going on. And
Yeah.
I think
So,
I
like, what
see people,
adjustments would, sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I think I just see people a little bit too late in the process for that sometimes, and then it's harder to get back out of it.
All right, that was like a question that you'd kind of mentioned when we
Yeah,
were in person, and I was going to ask later, but that actually pretty appropriate now. So like you had mentioned when I saw you that like there's a pretty notable difference between the injuries you see and the injuries people have, or at least on the time scale, right?
yes,
And
yeah.
like, what do you? So what are those differences, and do you wish people would come to you faster sometimes?
I do wish people would come to me faster. And I think some of the hesitancy is it's not that people think that they can do it like better on their own. I think it's they don't even know what is
Yeah.
happening. Is they're just going to throw medication at it, and they think maybe they can kind of work their way out of it, and they don't want to end up getting roped into just like weeks and months of therapy a couple times a week for an hour or more.
Hmm.
And a lot of times it's just a visit or two, and it may even just be a consult. And I wish people would come in sooner so we could change those things when they go from being an acute thing where something is just stirred up, and now it's transformed into maybe like a higher grade, maybe even like a tendon tear or a labral tear, like a cartilage tear, where
I have one
before
of
it
those.
just
They're
been,
not fun.
yeah, they're not fun. And they can be something that's just a lot more manageable. I think people are afraid of like a big time investment up front, and it ends up being
Hmm.
that on kind of the on the back end. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. I know a few people who are they've been to a PT in the past and they ended up being strung along or something like that. So it's like
yeah,
it's just hard to like figure out
yeah,
who to trust or who to find, or it's like any profession, there's good and bad, and it's difficult sometimes when you don't know what you're looking for.
yeah. And I'll apologize on behalf, I think, of like the sports medicine industry. I don't know that we've done ourselves some favors with the way we
Yeah.
manage those things, because a lot of it is we plug people into the pipeline of they're going to be seen 2 to 3 times a week for 75 minutes, and they're going to come in and do exercises in a room where they could just be doing them at home, instead of getting some hands-on things and then some education on what they can do at home and then come back in a week or two. So I just don't think there's not enough therapists, trainers, chiropractors, whoever else that operate that way. And
Yeah.
I can see how we fall into that because everybody's got to make money. But
Yeah.
I think we're mismanaging people and we're kind of watering down the quality of what we're doing if we treat that way.
I agree. I mean, my dad was a PT and he was a PT before the DPT thing existed. And it was like,
Yeah.
he saw a big change in the industry and over the 40
Yep.
years he was. And it's like, it's, he lamented it pretty aggressively.
Yeah.
Yeah, he I don't think he died many years ago, but I don't think he'd be super stoked about the way that it's continued to develop. And that said, like I could not have a structuring physical body without some of the like help he and his like compatriots have given me, right? Because like I just was a dick to myself for my entire teens and 20s and just physically abused my own body. So
Pretty typical
without
guy.
some stuff like, yeah, exactly, right? So like without stuff like PT and whatever, like I just wouldn't be a functioning human. But that
Yeah.
said, like it is really difficult even for me when I know what I'm looking for to decide like, is this worth dealing with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you made the point, how do I know who to even look for?
Mm-hmm.
And I think even if you look at credentials or the letters behind somebody's names, I don't know if that's enough. I think that you really should just
Yep.
go and ask the people or find somebody else in your community that's actually gone and ask them, how do these people operate? How many times have you gone in there? What are you doing? Is it the same stuff every time, or are they changing it based on what you're feeling and how you're progressing? Do they give you homework? Are they giving you feedback? Or are you just getting kicked out in the gym? And I don't, I would like to say that you can look at things just based on whether somebody has, a board certification in orthopedics or sports, or whether or not they have like a CSCS or they're NASM certified or something else like that. But I don't even know that that's it. I think
I
you have to,
agree.
yeah, I think you have to find out how people individually operate, and then you can go, you kind of go see what you need to get done.
I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. And I really liked what you said about like reaching out to your community and seeing how they work. And then a couple points in there that I have found at least helpful for me were like, do they give you homework is a big one?
Yeah.
And then like, how do they operate? And like, do they try to keep you there for a long period of time? Like, those are questions that I tend to try to ask people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I
like, go ahead.
Oh no, I think the other comment I was going to make is I don't know that it's necessarily dangerous, but I think a lot of people do try to seek out information online because it's accessible.
Yeah.
And healthcare can be really expensive. Athletic training
Yeah.
can be really expensive. And so I don't think people are trying to cut corners. They're just trying to do the thing. They're trying to take advantage of the thing that's right there for them. But
Mm-hmm.
you can't police what's online. And some of it's good and some of it's really not good. And
Yeah.
everybody asked me the question, like, what should I look at? Or, what content do you look at online? I'm like, it's really hard, even under the same social media handles or from kind of the same, curators of content, it's the quality of it sometimes varies. So I can't even give people a blanket answer on that. I,
100%. Nah. And it's just like, it's also tough because, like, even if you try to do your due diligence, put something good out there, like it's not going to apply to everybody, right? Like I talked
correct.
about PF, I guess it's fasciopathy now, but that for
Yeah.
like a fucking hour. But it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, that's not going to cover everybody, even though it's a pretty in-depth discussion. It's really hard to, you might not fit in the box. And absolutely.
Yeah, even if it is plantar fasciitis or plantar
Yeah.
fasciopathy, it's so really often misdiagnosed, and people just think, "Oh, I have pain on the bottom of my foot." Well, it's I would say more than 50 or 60% of the time when somebody comes in with a referral for plantar fasciitis, it's not plantar fasciitis at all, and
Please,
and
please say more on that. Like, what do you mean?
it, it's a lot of times people will actually have referred pain from a tendon higher up in the shin, or you can sometimes get pain in kind of the top front part of the ankle that's
Mm-hmm.
referred from another area, like another part of the bone, like the distal part of your shin, the
Mm-hmm.
far part of your shin. There are things that can be referred down from the low back. Sometimes it's a stress reaction or stress fracture. It can be so many different things, but
Yeah.
even podiatrists that have been treating for 20 or 30 years, they'll send patients to me with these orthotics that are overly rigid, and the patients are never going to wear them. And they're diagnosed with plantar fasciitis after having multiple injections, and that's not what they're dealing with at all. you know?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That
it's
see
really
that this is
tricky.
further frustrating, right? Like you go not even just to a PT, but like to a podiatrist, which usually
Mhm.
means you had to go to your doctor, you had to get a referral, you would spend a decent amount of money unless your insurance is great, and you're still getting like not even mistreated but misdiagnosed. Like that's very
Yeah.
frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and that's not to knock on any individual profession
No,
or
not at all.
set of providers. It's just difficult. And I think that's a product of the way the healthcare system is run in the US. So I'm not saying like don't use any
Agreed.
provider, that's one of the kind of the spokes in the wheel or the whole system, in the American healthcare
Sure.
system. It's just you have to do. It's not fair, but you have to do some homework up front to find somebody that's good, and you can't trust whoever you're referred to by like a GP or whoever's in your network. Sometimes you have to go outside of that, and you
Yeah.
really have to do the homework up first before you land in an office and get information that may or may not be useful for you.
Yeah, I mean, some of the like, if you're whoever's listening to this, I'm sure it's just like you are weird when it comes to the like general American populace, right? Like
Yeah,
you are not the sedentary desk worker who uses who steps like
yeah,
3,000 steps a day at max, right? Like, so they are not used to looking at someone like you, so it is
yeah,
very hard to diagnose because it's just not what you see every day.
yeah. You're abnormally normal,
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
and you're
You're
doing what
like,
you should be doing. And then when you go in there with pain, that's kind of a common product of the stuff that you should be doing. And it's going to be there in cycles. You just have to know how to manage it. You get told things like, well, if it hurts, why are you doing that thing? So just stop running if it bothers you.
yeah,
There's your problem, you know. Now pay your
yeah.
bill and leave my office. So that that's not going to work. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's this general like Occam's razor idea of like, don't look for zebras, it's probably horses, but occasionally it's a zebra, man. And like, if
yeah,
it's a zebra, then we're looking for the wrong thing. So yeah,
yeah,
it's a tough bag.
yeah. So I'd say, the take home maybe should be things are often not what they seem. There's a reason that people go to school for an eternity to take a look at these things. Not
Yeah,
everybody is equally as good at it seeing what's really happening or treating what's really happening, though. So you just kind of have to do a little bit of homework on the front end, see who really is good at this stuff, go see them. It's worth the money up front. You're going to save probably three or fourfold at least if you go in early with somebody that knows what they're doing and is really trying to help you and be efficient with your time and your money. And you'll be happier with the process if you just kind of lean into that work up front.
that's cool. So like, if we are maybe looking at some of the questions you may ask, and I realize like we talked about seeing how they work, but like, what would someone be looking for if they're trying to assess whether this would be a good place to go, and like what questions might they ask?
Yeah, I'd say one is just have they had results with anybody that that's got the thing that you've got or something in the ballpark of it. So if you have some type of knee pain or if you've got a hip issue or a labral issue or something like that, who's somebody in the area that's been good at treating this that has actually managed it well. And if you can't find somebody that's treated the thing that you've got, if you kind of got a unique thing, does somebody have some street cred for managing injuries for the event that you do, for the type of thing that you do? Are they taking a really thorough look at it up front? Like, are they doing a really thorough interview and not just taking a look at things and getting right into treatment, but are they asking you a lot about what does your volume look like throughout the year? Have you changed anything with your footwear or the way you're running? Have you changed anything with strength training? Are there other life stresses going on? Like, are they really, really thorough, not just about who you are as an athlete, but what your day looks like and what your recent history has looked like? Is it somebody that does something like that? And then are they really thorough with watching how you move? Not are they just videotaping you on a treadmill, but what are they saying about it? Is it somebody that just really seems like they know what they're doing and they don't have just like cool toys? Because sometimes I've seen this. Sometimes people have like these really nice motion capture systems that cost,
Mm.
$6,000 or $10,000, and they're driving around at this really well branded, you know, uh, what are those the Sprinter vans, like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and they've done a great job at marketing and having all the cool toys, but it's a lot of flash and there's no substance to it.
Sure.
So are they really thorough with what they do? Is the information that they're giving you really good? And if it doesn't work up front, either for you or for somebody else they've worked with, have they changed their process? And are they not just going to stick with the same thing over and over? Because that exists a lot too, and people
Yeah,
kind of get roped into doing the same thing for forever. And
I like that.
are they? You can't really look at expense because I think some people charge a little bit more because they're good at what they do,
Hmm.
but they don't do it as much. Um, I I actually used to get in trouble at some of the clinics I worked at because I would only see people like 8 to 10 times. And they'd be like, why don't you see them for longer? And I'm like, because they're better. Uh,
Sorry, man. I'm laughing because my
and
dad used to get in trouble for the same
and
shit. Like after they switched to it, like after he sold his practice and he switched to an insurance model, like working fill-in work, and they'd be like,
yeah,
why are these people gone? It's like because they don't fucking need to be here anymore.
yeah, because I told them I've done my job and they can fire me. That's the entire point of it.
Exactly.
And so you should be looking for somebody that's equally as motivated to get you out of their
Yeah.
office, their clinic, or their gym as they are to have you there so they can do the right thing. Because the point of what they're doing is to get you back out there living your life and doing what
Hmm.
you love and maybe what's a part of your career. So I think somebody that seems motivated not just to, kind of feed their bottom line, but to get you back to doing the thing that you really care about. And are they listening to you? If are they actually interviewing you well and paying attention? I think those things are really important.
Couldn't agree more. I like that a lot. So you mentioned like using too many gadgets or fancy things or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there has been some development since not just my dad stopped doing PT, but since he
Yeah.
died and whatever. So like I actually have some big questions on this. So what would be like dry needling, e-stim, these kind of things? Where are we on some of these modalities? Like, do they work? Do we know why they work? Like, where are on some of these things that might work, might look for, or might just be witchcraft that they're trying to like up your bill on?
I don't know that any of it's necessarily witchcraft.
Cool.
I think maybe we're being disingenuous if we say we know exactly why it's doing what it's doing.
That's
And
fair.
we're definitely being disingenuous if we say it treats everything,
Cool.
because some of these things don't treat everybody. My patients that are more sensitized to pain are not good dry needling candidates, at least in the beginning. If somebody is just sweating through the sheet and I'm talking about a needle and they haven't even seen it yet, that's not where we're going.
What
If
is dry
somebody,
needling real fast? Because it seems to be
oh man,
everywhere right now.
yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't want to get myself in trouble on this because
No,
it's
you're good.
kind of a pillow fight with acupuncturists and PTs in some states, and it shouldn't be. There's
Hmm.
enough room in the sandbox for everybody.
Sure.
Effectively, it's using a needle to change somebody's musculoskeletal pain or change their function. And you can do that. Some people think by treating trigger points or areas where there's more tension, lower pH, less blood flow, less oxygen, less whatever in an
Sure.
area, or by putting a needle into an area and running stimulation through it to get it to be more active. I think those are the
Hmm.
two primary ways that it's used. There are others that are used maybe a little bit more like a prolotherapy would, where you're intentionally trying to
Got it.
damage an area to stimulate recovery. So you're going in and using that needle to actually cause some damage. So then
Hmm.
people can put some relative load on it now that we've restarted this healing process, and then maybe that'll help a tendon, maybe that'll help a certain part of the muscle. But it's typically done through trigger point dry needling, through using stimulation, or using kind of that more irritating type of technique. But that's not all of it. Um, I'd say the primary difference between that and acupuncture that most folks would say is the examination behind what you're doing. So it looks different. It's more like a musculoskeletal neuromuscular exam than it is looking at pulse points or what's going on with your tongue or different things with your health history, like an acupuncturist or traditional Chinese medicine specialist might look at. And then the treatment is probably going to be a little bit different too. Like physical therapists don't use meridian maps, or they should not be, unless they're also dual certified and licensed through a state as an
Yep.
acupuncturist. I don't even know if that can happen, but the way you're treating and the methodology behind your treating is a little bit different. I don't even know. It's there's a lot of gray area there, but
Yeah, I get that.
that's kind of the gist of it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And like who might be a candidate for something like that, right? Like when might that be used in a way that isn't just trying to up the bill?
So I'll give you one that's usually really good for it, and that's like low grade like hip pain, like that's related to a tendon issue.
Okay.
And almost always, I mean, probably 80% plus, 90% plus of the patients I get that come in with a diagnosis of, oh my God, I even forget what this is. Word finding for me on Friday is tough. Hip bursitis.
Got it. Okay.
It's never bursitis. It's kind of in the same
Okay.
thing of like in house. It's never lupus for me. It's never bursitis.
I
And
heard another PT say that the other day. Like, is that really a thing where it's almost never bursitis?
correct. And
Okay.
I think the reason why it was so commonly diagnosed is it's a thing that they could, and I'm not saying it was on purpose, but I think it's a thing that they were looking for. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you have pain
Sure.
in that area, you could inject it with a steroid. And that's something
Sure.
you could bill for. And it probably in the minds of some, orthopods, like, oh, this is the thing I can treat and help people with.
Mm-hmm.
And if you dump some steroid into an area that's painful, well, look at that. Now it's going to feel better for a short period of time.
Sure. That makes sense.
Fix the
Yeah.
issue, and over the long haul, it's actually going to make it worse because
Yep.
steroids are not good for connective tissue and for bone.
Yep.
In fact, I think most insurance companies are limiting to about 3 a year now because they've kind of figured that out. And there's issues with insulin resistance and all kinds of other weird metabolic stuff with those. So,
Yeah.
but all that said, people come in with lateral hip pain almost always. When I see that, it's somebody kind of in their late 30s to mid 40s or maybe early 50s. Usually women more than men, but it's usually gluteal tendinopathy. So it's an issue with the connection between one of the glute muscles and the hip, and that tendon just can't take enough load, and it's really, really painful. And because of that, one of their glute muscles is just chronically on. It won't shut off. And that muscle itself is causing a lot of referred pain because it's trying to guard and it's trying to do the job of this tendon. It's doing something it's not supposed to be doing. So it's not going to fix the problem, but it will help take away the pain so that somebody can do more of what they're supposed to do with like high repetition loading for that glute tendon, so they can build it up over time and they can change, what it looks like as far as like compliance and how much load it can take and how many repetitions it can take and whether you can put direct compression on it, sleep on that side, run on that side, all of that. So it's an initial treatment for gluteal issues for people that have pain in that outside part of the hip, but it's not the ultimate fix. I think that's another point too with some of these things is if somebody's just giving you a passive treatment and they're not giving you any follow-up with strength or mobility or re-education on how you're running or what you're doing with your day or how you're sleeping, they've done you a massive disservice because you're going to feel better. And then maybe you go out for 6 months and then you come back and now the issue is worse.
Yep.
They haven't fixed the problem. They fixed your pain.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And pain is not the thing that we're really treating. It's the ability for your body to do what it needs to do. Pain's just, pain is a subjective emotional experience that comes as a result of different things that are happening. But not always is there a one-to-one correlation between the pain that you're feeling and what's really happening. And sometimes that's an overshoot or an undershoot. People,
Interesting.
yeah, people really need to treat the underlying issue.
So if we are looking at some of those, like, I mean, I realize this is so generalized because we're not talking about like a specific patient, but
Huh?
like you mentioned about like foot pain and often not necessarily being PF stuff. I know that like knee pain is you couldn't as someone who often like gets the text like my knee hurts. I'm like that is the least helpful thing you could possibly tell me other than like my body hurts. But all
And
right.
the sky is
Um,
blue. Cool.
yeah,
Thanks. Yeah.
exactly. Right. Like Jesus. Okay. So, but when we're looking at knee pain that you tend to see in the like running and trail running community, like what happens for you? Like where does your head go? Like what do you tend to look at and like what do you tend to see?
So I'd say it's how I treat is based on the presentation, how it got there, and what the person is
Mm-hmm.
reporting. The most common type of knee pain that I see is patellofemoral pain, and that's almost always a result of too much loading too quickly, and it's not necessarily coming from like the quad not being strong enough or somebody's running form is off. It's that just the leg in general has gotten kind of hammered with this stress that it doesn't know what to cap is usually tracking a little bit off because the leg's fatigued. And so now you're relying a lot more on your IT bands, parts of your glutes that are being overworked. Your foot's probably being overworked too. Your pelvis is collapsing. All of these things are happening. So there's an overload issue to the outside part of the leg. There's an overload issue to the connective tissue, the articular um, cartilage that's on the knee. And you have all these mechanical and compressive issues that are causing pain. And there's nothing broken usually. There's not usually anything that's like frayed in these kind of acute onset issues. It's just you need to change how much volume somebody's doing so they can run efficiently, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not driving those pain symptoms. And you can get somebody to do enough strength training so that they can cue that musculature and the mechanical system to kind of work the way it's supposed to. But you've got to give things enough time to adapt, both from a strength standpoint and from just a general movement standpoint, from just like a hormonal standpoint too for your
Yeah.
body. I mean, things are really pro-inflammatory if you're running all the time. And
Yeah.
running without strength training jacks up your cortisol like crazy, and you don't have enough of the really good hormones that you need. There's not of the stuff that builds you up. It's all the breakdown stuff. It's all the catabolic stuff. So I'm sure
Yeah.
you've seen this, that there's just not
Oh
enough
yeah.
strength training there
Absolutely.
to get enough testosterone there to try to manage what's going on with your estrogen cycles. Like that's a part
Sure.
of it too.
And
So
just the lack of ability to connect to the muscles you need to be connecting to, right? Like we hear,
absolutely.
like
I mean,
I'm not a huge fan of the term gluteal amnesia, but the general idea is like, yeah, right. Like I knew that'd make you laugh. It makes every PT laugh, but the general idea is
oh,
there.
Kelly
I just like,
Starrett.
yeah,
Oh
there we go.
man.
But yeah, I do have the general idea of like, I try to have someone do a deadlift and they just like immediately drop into a squat in their quads because they just like don't know how to create a hinge. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, when you run, we need to create hip extension. If you can't
Yeah.
do that, then shit is bad. So yeah, no, I
Yeah.
feel you. Yeah.
Yeah. Your body's just it's gonna move into the patterns that it's got available. And sometimes you've just fatigued yourself into a place where now you can't do the thing that you need to do to move efficiently. And you
Mm-hmm.
can maybe get by with that for a while, especially if you drop in some like over the counter medication on top of it, or you're just kind of numbing out, you know,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
and just like running through pain. You can get by for a while, but it's long term. That's just not what anybody wants. I mean, you want to be able to put in the most miles and do the most races and have the most good experiences for your life for a longer period of time. So I think people just in general are too aggressive with their buildup because
Mm-hmm.
they've got a race that they want to do. They have a limited amount of time, and they're they're just following a training program that they see online, and they don't feel pain for a while. But there's all this stuff lurking in the background that just
Yeah.
kind of hasn't reared its head yet.
Yeah,
It,
100%. And like I often have this like this phone call happens so often where it's like, well, I have this I was talking to a friend and he convinced me it was a good idea to sign up for this thing, and it's
Yeah.
in like 2 months. And I was like, cool. Well,
Yeah.
and at that point, it's like, how can we? I can tell you not to do it, and you're going to do it anyway, or we can make it less bad, right? Which is like
Yeah.
actually really tiring. But I would actually prefer that you just signed up for the one next year, and you gave me like 14 months, and we could crush it. Right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's like usually somewhere in the middle there that we have to be. That's just like, okay, what can we do? Like,
Yeah. And I can see how it happens.
yeah, I
And
do too. I was an
um,
idiot in my entire 20s. That's why I'm broken. So I totally get it. Right?
I'm
Yeah.
still an idiot. I'm
Yeah.
41, and
Yeah, 100%, man. And like I am too. I've just like I guess I've just learned to manage it better. I think now I just have enough muscle mass that I get away with more. But yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. I think there's just, I don't know that there's not enough messaging about it or this isn't out there enough. It's just not going to sell as well because it's not as fun to do a 10K or a half marathon instead of like a really fun 50K,
Yeah.
50 miler when you're not quite ready for that.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think you heard this over and over at the conference that we were at together. Um, you know, everything was just give yourself plenty of time. You know, if it seems
Yeah.
like maybe it's going to be a stretch at 4 to 5 months, like maybe you really need 12 to 14. And you just want to make sure that you've left yourself some leeway for the little things that are going to pop up, especially if it's your first race at a certain distance. Or if you've got more life stress, like if you've got kids or you're still in school or there's something else going on, you know, all of that stuff builds. It's not just what's going on mechanically, it's everything that's going on in your life. And that's going to impact recovery and performance and your ability to train at a certain level and for a certain duration. So I think people are just kind of by trying to be uh, better, by trying to make their lives better, they're sometimes making them a little bit more challenging because they're
Hmm.
just trying to put too much in there. And
Yeah.
I think we just need to be a little bit more gentle with the way we approach things over the short term so that things work out better in the long term.
I agree. And I do wish the messaging were a little different on your point. Like if you go run a good 10K, like I have not done that for the record. If you go do that, it's really hard, right? It's not like
Yeah.
that's somehow easier. Like
Yeah.
I haven't done that because I actually know to go run a 10K, it sucks for like a straight hour. And it's like really
It's
bad
painful.
for an hour.
Yeah.
Whereas like a 50K is like kind of bad for 6 hours, right? Which
Yeah.
is, I don't know where your trade-off is there, but like the 10K is arguably tougher in some ways. And I mean, it is tougher in some ways, and it's arguably tougher, period. Um, I don't know. It kind of depends on what your pain tolerance is for different stuff, but it's a tough thing to do. And if you do that occasionally, you will be faster so that like your 50K and stuff is shorter and easier in other ways as well, right? Like having some back and forth between these like shorter races and some kind of build up not only like gives you the break and a bit more of an on ramp, but it actually does make your performance better in the other stuff as well.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up this point, actually. Um, I think people race in a way that's not sustainable.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. I was
like
just
if you're
talking about Heather
running,
Hart with this like 4 hours ago. We were just like, people do this stuff and it's absolutely not sustainable.
yeah. And this is the thing that people that come from a track background, even if it's just like eighth grade track, they'll understand this. You can't, not every race is an A race.
Yeah.
Like you can't just completely destroy yourself at every race. Like not every race is your highest priority race. You can't do that.
Hmm.
Even if you only do them a couple of them a year, just psychologically you can't do that. Maybe mechanically you can get away with it, but that's just not. Things work out a little bit better when you have a race that you're like, look, this is going to be kind of 85% of my peak performance, and then this one 3 6 months down the road, that's where I'm really going for it. You shouldn't really be emptying the tank at every single thing that you do. And I think people
Hmm.
actually will be kind of happier with the overall process if they come into certain races knowing that, like, I'm not going to PR here, but here's the time that I'm looking for. And hopefully I'm going to feel better afterwards and I'm going to recover more quickly afterwards if I approach it a certain way where I'm not just hammering the whole time. I'm not redlining here. You can't do
Absolutely.
that all the time.
No,
And
not at all. And like sorry, on your note of like eighth
yeah,
grade track, like you're so correct. Like Steve Magnus talks about this for sure. And
yeah,
these are for events that are like maximum 3 miles, right? Like these are,
yeah.
we're not talking a 50-mile race. So like, and you, if you can't empty the tank on 3 miles regularly, like, how do we think we're doing this on these ultras? It's crazy.
Mhm. That's, I think, there's a danger in trail and ultra races that there's not with some other things. And I've spoken with so many runners about this that run both. They run both on the road and on the trail. You feel better after a 100 miler on trail than you do after some road marathons, depending on the effort.
Yeah.
And you'll feel better sooner, but your body's not ready to just
Yeah.
keep going after it. And unless you're like Courtney Dauwalter or something,
Yeah. But even her, like
just an
I made
alien.
this point after, yeah, she is an alien, but also made this point after she like did her triple, right? Like she went into it with a very different, she went into it with a very specific mindset that I'm worried is going to get lost over the next couple of years, where it's like her whole goal was to kill it at Western States. And then if she could do the other ones, she was going to. Right. But like
Yeah,
going into the summer, she's like, this is the prior, this single day is the
yeah,
priority.
yeah,
And then if I feel good, I'm going to go for it.
yeah.
And I feel like now that she like tripled that so hard, we kind of lose that. But
Mhm.
that's an important thing for us to really remember from her perspective as like
Yeah.
one of the best athletes and arguably coaches for herself in the world. Like, you know, it's you can't try to. I would guarantee that if she tried to PR all three of those in a similar way that she did, her training would look different and it might not have gone as well. But the fact that she like went into this like first race with as much vigor as she did, that allowed her to like prioritize everything else really well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's with one of the most kind of elite mechanical setups that we've seen in this generation, or probably a
Yeah,
couple.
right.
In the, I think one thing that's important for just the general population to understand is that elite athletes, it's not just that they're tougher, they can take a workout or a race that would destroy most of us and they recover a lot more quickly. I mean, the biology
Absolutely.
is the same, but it's kind of not. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
reason they can do what they can do, along with all the training that they've done for, you know, however many years and decades.
Yeah.
They can take things that other people can't and come back. And it's not just because they're tough, it's because their bodies recover. So she can do things that
Yeah.
other people cannot do, even among the other elites.
I
And she,
mean, absolutely
exactly what you
true.
said, coming in, she knew that, Western, that's the priority race. And these other ones, it's just like the Hunger Games. And if I can survive those, I'm going to do
Yeah.
it. But it's not a given that that's going to happen.
No.
Um, and it's not
And
to say that people can't have like a really great summer where they've got like this full slate of races, but you've got to be prepped for it and your body has to be trained to be able to take that. This isn't me saying like you shouldn't have like 8 races in a summer, go for it, but you got to be prepped for the specific demands of that, and psychologically you better be ready to only race at a certain level, and be really specific about what you're doing, intentional about what you're doing.
absolutely. And it's like there's definitely a prioritization there where
Yeah.
like Ray Sanchez is a big one in the community where I think he races like every 2 weeks and he runs these hundreds and he's like, he's very good. But like, even he would say that if he really wanted to like win races, he would not do that. Right.
Absolutely.
Like that's a real
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And
Mhm.
then on the genetics aspect, like we do not address that enough. I feel like
Yeah.
if you're ever in like the presence of some of these athletes and like see what they do, it's wild. Like I know you've seen some of them, but like my
Right.
boss at the tennis club, like he is not a professional athlete, but he like got drafted for basketball and like had like a near a 4 foot vertical when he was a kid and like was pressing multiple plates and it's just like I look at that, man. It's like you and I are not the same species, barely. Like it's weird. It's weird to see. And it's like it doesn't matter how much I trained. There's no way. And it's a very different thing, you know?
Yeah. I remember, oh man, this is getting close to like 10 years ago now. But I had an athlete in that she was having some issues, I think, with like her Achilles. And she was really worried about doing a high profile race and doing well at it. And I remember she got to a point where, I think after a month or something, the treatment, she was running about 110 to 115 miles with something stupid, like 25,000, 30,000 feet of climbing. It was an
All right.
insane amount of climb, like just kind of like I didn't believe it. And then I remember asking like, "How are you feeling?" She's like, "Well, I mean, sometimes it's like a 1 out of 10," and I'm like, other people just can't do this. Like, no one would be able to recover at this level. And then they also wouldn't say like it's kind of okay when it bothers me every now and again. On the days when I only climb 5,000 feet. It's just no.
Yeah, exactly.
people,
There's no
people just
exactly.
don't, it just seems like just kind of cartoonish and ludicrous, but
Mhm.
they can handle things that other people can't handle.
Yeah.
They've also trained in a way that most people just can't train, so that
Yeah. I mean,
that's
Courtney
part of it
Walter's been
too.
doing high level endurance sports and she was 8. So when you have 3 decades on it, on top of that physiology, you're just like,
Yeah,
it's wild. It's wild. It creates a really interesting
yeah,
human. But
yeah. The one thing I would say that people can take from elites, though, is not necessarily from their training, but it's from what they do with recovery. It's if they're really loading a lot. I mean, they're sleeping 9 or 10 hours a night. They'll use things like muscle stimulation to just get rid of some soreness, not necessarily to like recover faster, but just to feel better sooner, just to flush some things out. They're really good at
mm,
hydrating. They're really good with their diet. They're really intentional with nutritional timing and what they're doing to take care of themselves. And those are things that apply across the board. What you can do with your training is not going to be the same, but the way they have to approach how they recover is absolutely the same.
yeah, so this is the thing I would wanted to talk to you about, and we talked about this a little bit at the conference. But like, what are some recovery things that really matter? Because I think we get a little bit out of this with the elites too. Where like everybody
Yeah,
talks about Courtney's like pizza and beer, but it's like she also, actually eats food, like and vegetables
yeah.
and things, right? So like, what and sleeps and all sorts of stuff. Like, what do we do for recovery that really makes a difference? Is it the cryo boots or is it the like the protein you eat? Like what really matters?
I'll steal a Jason Coop common quote here and say that most people are majoring in minor things when it comes to recovery
Yep.
methods. And it's there's nothing really that's that sexy out there that's going to help you recover better. I mean, it truly
Yep.
is just sleep, it's adequate protein intake and caloric intake. It's not kind of watching out for the reds thing. I'm sure you've discussed that at some point, but just relative
Oh yeah.
energy efficiency. I think especially for women and hormonal balance and stress fractures and that type of thing, like making sure that you're adequately fueled and hydrated, that you sleep well, that given how much stress is in your life or what's going on at any amount of time, you're not overtraining, um, and that you do some strength work to support what you're doing, and that in the off season you're doing more strength work. I think that that's not something that you're doing like kind of in line with a given training week. But if you don't do that up front, you're not going to recover as well. So I think that that's a part of the process that people just may not think of. But if you don't have a periodized training season where you're adding more strength and you're adding more resiliency to your muscle, your connective tissue, to your bone, literally, you're setting yourself up to not being able to recover as quickly during certain parts of your training year.
Yeah.
It's
It just feels like this is the theme of the day because this is also kind of what I was talking with Heather about it early this morning. But it's
yeah.
like, what is if we were going to periodize a year, and you having done this with like quite a few very good athletes, like what does that look like on your end? Like how would we do that in a way that allows us to get the most out of maybe like a yearly calendar?
It totally depends on the athlete's history, but I'd say in general, you are looking at um, doing like more heavy loads in periods of time where there's not as much volume. And then the opposite
Hmm.
is true where there's a lot more training volume. You're doing lighter, you're doing fewer sets a lot less often of still some relatively heavy things. So you can kind of maintain that strength, but it's not going to be overloading you based on how much training volume you've got. And it depends on the setup for the runner, but I'd say for most folks, a lot of these ultras, they're not in the winter, they're not even in the early spring. And so right around now is the time where people are kind of deloading a little bit more, and they should be doing a little bit more strength training. So they should be doing squats and deadlifts. They should be doing some things with single leg strength, even if it's just like band work or something like that. Heather could obviously speak a lot more to this, but there should be a season or a couple of seasons in your year where you're doing heavier strength work at a little bit higher volume, but there should still be some of that during your peak training periods.
Yeah,
When you're kind of sharpening for races, it should still be there because you don't want to lose that. Uh,
100%. Yeah, she
even
and I are very aligned on that. We have a more
yeah,
similar background than many people in this space, and absolutely couldn't agree more.
I think from a hormonal standpoint too, even just like the way you feel with training, I mean, like maintaining some of the more anabolic parts of your hormonal profile, that's really important.
I
I think
agree.
that's something that's probably not talked about enough.
It's not
Um,
even talked about enough in the strength world, if I'm being honest.
yeah,
Like we're
yeah,
starting to understand, like there's still this very like 1970s Arnold perspective on like bodybuilding. And as much as like there's some validity to that, it's not like it's wrong. It's just it's incomplete,
oh,
right? So like we know that the muscles kind of
great
tear
point.
and rebuild and all this stuff, but there's also like a massive hormonal signal. And if anything, that's more important than the actual micro tears and stuff that are happening. And the
Yeah,
fact that like doing a heavy back squat stimulates a massive amount of testosterone production is important. you know?
I think maybe I mean, this is almost like a kind of a horror story to look at, but like Ryan Hall, by the time he was done,
Mm,
I mean, he had sub 205 marathoner, one of the fastest American marathoners ever.
yeah.
He couldn't run 10 or 15 miles a week. And I can't
Yeah.
remember how much supplemental testosterone he was taking. And people wouldn't
There's a
think
lot.
that now, based on what he looks like, he looks like a completely different person. But when he was running 120 plus miles a week, I mean, by the end of it, I think hormonally the guy was so depleted. I mean, he just didn't even want to get off the couch. So running is
Yeah.
it's not even bad for your joints. We've totally debunked that. I mean, if you don't run more than 50 or 60 miles a week for 30 years and you don't do it at a really high elite level, it's actually really good for your joints. It's protective of your cartilage and your bones, but it's not good for your hormonal profile if you don't supplement it with really heavy strength training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is, it signals your body to be more efficient, which is just not a signal you need all year round. That's not a
Yeah.
thing that we need, especially in our like, general climate of everything. But
Mhm.
yeah, signaling to your body that like you maybe need to retain some muscle mass here and there is it's a worthwhile thing if you want to be able to live to be older than 55.
Yeah. Truly, do you think people probably underestimate or overestimate how much they have to do to get stronger and feel better with strength training?
You say overestimate?
Yeah, do they feel like
Yeah.
I feel like most people think like, oh, I've got to do hours of this. And I'm like, I think like literally a half hour for some people a week is enough if you're doing it the right way and you're really intentional with it.
Yeah. So I mean, if I were gonna like give a general prescription on people, like probably 2 hours a week, especially if you're
Yeah.
running. And like that's 2 hours start to finish. Like that includes some mobility stuff to warm up to make sure you have decent range of motion and some like all the accessory stuff. Like my shoulders messed up from a separation. So that's all my like external rotations and stuff. I do like 2 hours a week. And it's been a slow build. Like it's not like I, build a ton of muscle overnight. It's been over years, but it's like it's been a constant increase and while running and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, it doesn't take a ton. I will
Yeah.
say that there are a couple chunks in the year where I kind of don't run and I put just a ton of time into strength training. That's like, but that's like 2 months collectively out of the year, and that's
Yeah.
largely because I work in a space where I need to do that to be better at my job. If I didn't do that, it'd just be like 2 hours a week. I'd be fine.
I think there's something to be said too about just having variability in
Hmm.
training throughout the course of a training year that's going to be part of the recovery process for most athletes. I don't know if
Yeah,
people know this about, Killian Jornet, but he does not run for like 4 or 5 months out of the year. He just
yeah.
does all that ski mountaineering stuff and climbing.
So Walmsley did this
Obviously,
year too.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, does not run, does not lace up a pair of running shoes for a solid chunk of the year. And I think he's done okay, you know.
yeah. And I
Um,
mean, I think some of that is like it's just your body only has so many systems, right? And if you can only if you're kind of new to running, then you probably want to maintain some of it for the soul's like skill factor. But that's like when I talk to people about this, that's like 10 minutes a day, man, just to like make sure your running form like stays fresh. Like if you want to take a season off and do a little bit of work on running and just bike, like
yeah,
great.
I think just talking about the recovery thing and the injury management thing at large too. One of the things that I've gotten more into in the last couple of years is because most of what I do is pain management. Truly, I mean, people don't come to
Yeah.
me because they want, to manage the compliance of their Achilles tendon. It's because they just don't want to feel pain.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
I I think I've gotten more into kind of the psychological and emotional components of that, and I think something that a lot of runners start to miss, especially after they've been doing it for a while, is like keeping it fun.
Mm-hmm.
And people, I'm not saying that people take it like too seriously or they're not doing the right things or it's always going to be fun, but I think that like having some variability in the way you train or who you train with or the stuff that you sign up for or just doing something that's not even running related, like just changing how you feel about your body in general and what you're doing with it can really make a big difference in how people feel and what things look like for them throughout the course of a training year. Because people really can get into ruts and just kind of get to the point where they hate what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And even if they're doing everything right from a mechanical standpoint and they've got like this really nice periodized training and or they're working with a coach or something like that, it gets to be a grind after a while. And so I think people that should almost be like the way you approach your diet. You have to make some room for keeping things just like fun and light and a little bit more playful, so that you actually enjoy what you're doing and you can continue to look forward to it.
I think it's so overlooked. It's like I think we all kind of get into this sport. Well, typically we get into the sport because we just like love being out in the woods and we do the thing, whatever. We just love
Yeah.
running, depending on what your, choices. And it's like at some point, for most people, it becomes this thing that you almost feel like you have to do. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for some people, it's maybe not a bad thing if they have a season where they kind of walk away from it for a little bit and then find a reason that they, really got into, running or training or whatever to begin with. And so they can kind of shake hands with it again. I think
I
I've
like
kind of
that.
gone through that in the last couple of years and really got to a space where I just hated running. And I think it was just because there was too much going on and
Yeah.
I was starting to use it for the wrong reasons. I mean, it was starting to become more of a purely a catharsis thing than it was like something that was bringing something positive to me. And um,
Yeah.
so I think that that's a piece of it, that it's more than just like the numbers and what you see on Strava. It's, you know, maybe people would have some benefit from using like the old Runner's World journals that they used to give out if you had a subscription and literally like not even writing down the numbers, but just like how did you feel about what you were doing and being honest
Yeah.
about
I like that.
it. And if
Yeah.
there's not enough happy faces there, then maybe it's time to kind of relook at what's going on.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know. I send out this like I tend to send out this weekly thing unless I it's like I miss 2 weeks a year kind of thing. So I send out this weekly thing to all my athletes, and like some of them overlook it and don't realize how important it is to me. But it's like, how's your mood? How's your sleep? How's these
Yeah.
things? What's your desire to train like? Like, do you have a libido? I don't care what your sex life is. I just care
Yeah.
that like we're not seeing a tank or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
all of these things that basically signal like fundamental hormonal profiles to me are important. They really, I care about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
For
I think
sure.
it's one of those things that if you're training yourself, like we should really look at because it does tend to cause it it causes a big shift in your training. If you hate being out there, it's not going to go well. So we got to keep it somewhat fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of tapping up on an hour. I had one more question or one more question for you. Like if
Yeah.
people are trying to stay uninjured, like we talked about strength training, taking some time off, like is there any like basics that we really need to make sure that we're covering that we haven't talked about? Or like how do we stay out of your office?
I would say it's a lot more simple than what people make it about. I think if you just kind of manage the amount of training that you're doing so that there's not big peaks and there's not big valleys either. I think that's something that happens. People race too hard, train too hard, they get burned out, and then they're not
Mm,
consistent. And so their training year, looks like the course profile at Hard Rock. Like that's
yeah,
kind of an issue. It's when things are more consistent with little undulations, um, people tend to do better. I'm not saying people shouldn't train a lot. I'm saying people should train within their means of what they can do mechanically, hormonally, and emotionally. So if you want to be really good, you got to train a lot. But it's just where there's these big peaks and big drop offs. That's where people seem to get into issues. It's whether or not those things are intentional. Like if you have a bit of a drop in your training, you want that to be something that you programmed in, not something that you had to do because you just did too much. So I think most people, if they take the amount that they're doing and they just drop it like 10 to 15% until they feel like they can really manage it, they're really consistent and they're not having to take more than a week off a year, then they can start building back up. I think that's something that would probably benefit most folks. I think most people just kind of overtrain in general. And then that leads to having to take time off. So they can't do as much. Like they would actually be doing more volume if it was more consistent, right? Like it's like,
I
oh, I can
agree.
run this,
Yeah.
I can do this, I can run 60 miles a week when I'm healthy, but then I get injured. Well, probably what it means is you can run like 48 to 50 miles a week, and that's your sweet spot. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
say that's probably one thing. I'd say people probably over or underestimate the amount of time it just takes to like do the thing and run well and eat well and get sleep and still do all the things for their normal life. So before signing up for something, like sit down and look at what your normal week looks like and where's this stuff going to go? Because it's not just, okay, it's X number of miles times, this many minutes. It's all of the other stuff too. And if that can't all go in there, you're just going to end up frustrated. So I think be really realistic about what you can do so you can feel happier about how it looks as a part of like just your life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more consistent. And just really make sure that you're building in some strength training, whether that's just 2 or 3 days a week, enough sleep. You got enough time to look at the nutritional stuff, and you got some time to just keep the parts of your life that are in there that keep you happy is a part of your training. Because if you don't have time with friends and family or your partner or your dog, you know,
Yeah.
like whatever, like is it really going to be worth it to you? It's going to end
Mm-hmm.
up detracting value from your life, and then you're not going to be able to recover well. You're not going to be able to train well. You're not going to feel good. So
Yeah.
I think consistency, being honest about how much time you really have, how much energy and focus it's going to take to do the stuff that you need to do, and then just adding in the little basic things and making sure that that's a part of your week. It's not rocket science. It's pretty simple, but it's just it takes some intentional work to make sure that you're looking at it the right way. But if you do that, I think you'll be happier with the overall result, and you'll be able to train more often.
Appreciate that. And then like on that, kind of on that note, there's this thought that I often hear pushed that's like there's no such thing as overtraining, it's just under recovery or something like that. And I don't agree with that, but I do think there's probably some spectrum to where there's like some validity there.
Yeah.
What do you think the like line is there on a general populace?
It's kind of interesting. I think if I would have heard that statement in college, there's no such a thing as overtraining. I would have said that's crazy. Um, I think it's actually very hard, and it's really rare that I've actually seen somebody overtrained. I just see people get injured
Hmm.
because they've overloaded like one specific thing, but they couldn't even get themselves to a point where they were training so consistently for so long that they were actually burned out. They were just hurt. They weren't overtrained. They weren't like doing things to the point where they were really depleted. They just were just doing too much too quickly, or they were not paying attention to something and they didn't manage an injury. So I think it's actually very hard to get overtrained. I don't.
And very sorry, like I think this is
Yeah.
important because I think this will throw people off. So very like we're talking from like you're talking from like an OTS standpoint, right? Like it is very
Yeah.
hard to
Oh,
get
yeah.
overtrained to a degree that your hormones are like problematic to like that
Yeah.
degree. Whereas like
Yeah. Like what, right?
you can
What
like
happened to Ryan Hall?
overtrain yourself in a week just because your hamstring can't handle it. But from a point of like your testosterone is in the floor, like that's really
Yeah.
hard to do. Got it.
Yeah,
Cool.
you're depleted. Your energy levels are gone. You're like actually depressed in the like neurological, psychological, emotional sense. You're actually depressed because of what's going on. Like your life is changing because of training, but you're not injured.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different thing. I just think that that's so rare that I don't even know that that should be like in the conversation. That's for such a select group of people. That's probably more common with elites or people that are doing like high level collegiate stuff than it is for the average person. I think people get injured before that ever happens. Um,
Yeah.
that's a but what does happen is people train too much for what they're capable of doing and what their lives really should be allowing them to kind of afford them to do.
Yeah.
Um, but as far as not recovering enough, I don't I don't know. Um,
I mean, it can be a complicated answer, man. It doesn't need to be either or, right? And I think like that last part that you just said
yeah,
is really important. Like if you have a busy life and your
yeah,
training schedule ends up requiring you to sleep 4 hours a night,
yeah,
not good. Like it means you don't get to
yeah.
train like that.
It just won't you won't be able to be as consistent with it where it's going to be at a level it's going to make you happy.
Yeah.
There's going to be big fluctuations with it, and it's just you're not going to be happy with the process. I think that if somebody is appropriately recovering, they're going to be able to train at the right level.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if anybody under recovers. I don't know. I think maybe people just don't do the right. I think that the language around this is misleading when people say, "Oh, they're not doing the right supplementary stuff."
Mm.
It's not supplementary. It's part of doing training the right way.
Yeah,
And if you don't do it, then you're not going to be training.
I agree.
So if you treat it like it's an ancillary thing and it's like, well, I'll get my strength stuff in on the sides, and I'll do some mileage where it really is like zone one, and the majority of it is like actually zone two, not hanging out in like three and four the majority of the time, then none of it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So, anything else you want to share, and like where can people find you on the internets and space and those kind of things?
Yeah, I think from a physical therapist standpoint, what I want to actually see when my patients come in is like what you're actually doing. I think people sometimes treat us like we're the dentist, and they try to like, they just want to not get in trouble, and they're like, oh, I did all of my stuff. And it's like, well, I just need to know what you can actually do. And if it's like a couple minutes a day, it's a couple minutes a day. Just tell me. So I think just like being really, really honest when you come in my office, that's what I want to see. Like, let me know what you can do, what you've actually been doing, what hurts, what's not good, how much medicine you're actually taking, whether you're
Yeah.
actually in your office. Um,
I want to second that so hard because like I just have people like, yeah, I'll do all of that, and then they come back next week and they're like, did you do any? No. I was like, cool, you should.
yeah.
And then I've had like one or two people that are like, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, thank you, that's all I need.
I love
Great,
that. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
bet, it's my favorite. Please tell me you're not going to do that.
Yeah, so I'd say, it's just from like a PT perspective, that's something that I always really appreciate is when people are just like really candid about what's actually going on. And I think people should know, most injuries don't actually take that much time to treat. It's much better to get in on the front end and find out that something's not that big of a deal than it is to find out later that now you've really torn your labrum or you actually do have plantar fasciitis. You're kind of stuck with it for 2 years, and there's no way around it. It's better to
Yep.
find it on the front end and do a little bit of work up front. Um, and
Yep.
um, and PT should not be that painful. It should be something where we're really trying to decrease the amount of symptoms that you've got. It shouldn't be this laborious thing where it's kind of beating the hell out of stuff. It actually should make you feel better. And it doesn't have to be we're in there like hammering away at stuff. We should be making your nervous system, we should be putting your nervous system in a place where it feels more relaxed and it feels safer. So if you're seeing somebody that just wants to needle everything and poke everything and hammer away at stuff and bruise you, maybe they're not doing their job because all of that is just like threat signaling to your body. I don't think that that's the way the good modern PTs treat. So,
Yeah.
uh, but besides those side notes, I don't have much of a social media presence because my presence is at home with my kids right now.
It's very healthy.
I have
Yeah, I like that a lot.
I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. I think
Oh, that's awesome.
over the next couple of years, that's going to change a little bit. But people can email me and just ask questions directly. So my email address is natcollinspT@gmail.com. I am on Instagram. I don't post much. If you want to message me, if you want to shoot me some reels, uh, my handle is NatCollinsDPT. You can probably just look at pictures of like my kids and my dog. That's pretty much it. Um, but I am always down for like new information, like anything that's out there. If people have questions about something like, hey, I saw this, what do you think of this? I will usually answer. I mean, I like helping people out, and I like knowing what's going on. Um, you know, I'm not going to hit you up on Snapchat or something like that, but I I do like knowing. I like knowing what's going on, what kind of weird trends are out there with like modalities and different treatments and that kind of thing. I like knowing, what the knees over toes guy is doing. So it shows up in my
Yeah.
Instagram messaging before it shows up in my clinic. So
There's a lot of them, man. And it's just like there's
I
so
love
many
them.
things out there. Yeah.
I love them because most of them
Yeah.
are actually pretty harmless and they're kind of
Yeah.
hilarious and entertaining. There's very little stuff that's out there that's actually dangerous. So when people are playing like internet police, it's kind of funny to me. Um, but
Yeah.
it's
No, I
usually
agree. I think
entertaining.
most of the time when I see it, I was like, that's either going to help you or it's going to do nothing most
It's
of
going
the
to be
time.
so stupid and worthless and a waste of your time. Yeah.
Yeah. Or if it does hurt you, you'll notice in about 3 seconds. Like if you have severe knee problems and you try to do a sissy squat before you're ready, you're gonna be like, oh, that's really painful. I'm not gonna do that. It's like, great,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't lunge 2 miles in a weighted vest, because it's going to work for some obscure
Yeah.
person like San Vicente or something. It's like, why are we doing this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this
Oh,
is
thanks, Nat.
cool.
I'll attach all that. I really appreciate it. This has been fun. I'll have to have you back on sometime to talk about some like
Yeah, I'd
specific
love to be
injury
back.
things.
Thanks,
Cool.
man.
Well, hang out for a sec, everybody. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. We'll be back soon with another one. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.